Bienvenue, welcome to Proust on Grief, the Intermittencies of the Heart, a conversation with William C. Carter in celebration of Marcel Proust's birthday. My name is Renee Ketchum, and I chair the Cultural Offerings programs of AFUSA. The Fédération des Alliances Françaises, AFUSA, is the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 25,000 learners of French each year learn French, love French, and live French. Here's a little video about us. We have some wonderful events coming up. This Thursday, we have Elizabeth Birkeland with her new book, Northern Light in Provence. We have the French Cinematheque with an incredible announcement on Monday featuring Olga, which is a wonderful film about an Olympic athlete in Ukraine. And then we will be celebrating the bicentennial of Lafayette's farewell tour in the US. So go to afusa.org and learn more. A few logistics, please stay on mute during the presentation, stay on speaker view. All questions will be answered in the chat. And if you have any technical issues, please just sign back in after a few minutes using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded to share on our national AF YouTube channel, and the total runtime will be 1 hour. I am thrilled to introduce today William C. Carter. Mr. Carter is the Distinguished Professor Emeritus of French at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. His biography, Marcel Proust, A Life, was selected as a notable book of 2000 by the New York Times. He co-produced the award-winning documentary film, Marcel Proust, A Writer's Life. Fereshteh Priou is the founder of the Proust Society of Greenwich and leads a monthly gathering of Proust enthusiasts every month and has been doing so since 2007. The group members engage in close readings of Marcel Proust's books, À la recherche du temps perdu. Fereshteh started the 4th round of reading of the book in January of 2023. I'm very honored to welcome both Fereshteh and Mr. William Carter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event. Melissa, do we have Bill Carter with us yet?
First, I haven't seen him yet.
He told me that he has a charity event beforehand, but he assured me that he will make it on time. I just called him and sent him an email, but we'll see. We'll start and we'll see if he joins us a bit later. Anyway, hello everyone. René and Melissa, thank you for this wonderful menu that the Alliance Française USA provides. I really admire this format that gives us the possibility of engaging in these conversations. Before starting, I'd like to mention that we have Tracy Duchesne joining us from the United Kingdom. She has agreed to do the readings of the text with her beautiful diction. Thank you, Tracy.
Welcome.
I'm sorry that Professor Carter is not yet with us, but it has been a great honor and pleasure to discuss this passage with him during our conversations on the phone and on Zoom. He agreed with my suggestion about analyzing this passage. I suggested it to him, and he loved the idea. And similar to myself, he thought that this is one of the more moving but also complex passages in Proust's book. I love Professor Carter's translations of Proust's book, and the text we are going to read today, or I'm going to put some slides. Melissa is going to put some slides on the screen for Tracy to read, and they all come from his book, which are full of annotations, and they're so helpful. I'm impatient to have his last volume come out in 2025. So the passages that we are discussing today are the subchapter of, it's a subchapter in the 4th volume of Proust's book, and it's titled The Intermittencies of the Heart. The text is a meditation on loss and grief, but also an inquiry into the nature of memory and self. It is said that Proust intended this title for his book instead of À la recherche du temps perdu. So that alone tells us that this section must have really been truly special to him. For those of you in the audience who have not read Proust or don't remember the passage, I take a few minutes to give a summary of the background story. The Intermittencies tell a story of the narrator, his second visit to the seaside resort of Baalbek, happening 1 year after the death of his grandmother, who accompanied him on his first trip to Baalbek. The grandmother's death and her disfigured image at the end is vividly described by the narrator at the close of the 3rd volume. But there is no mention of him grieving for her. Then comes the 4th volume, and we see the narrator mostly immersed in a life of social climbing and partying, and with his head full of thoughts of girls, etc., until we reach this subchapter and the narrator's return to Baalbek. Like the previous time, he stays at Le Grand Hôtel, and the manager who remembers him from the first trip gives him the same room. On his first night at the now familiar hotel room, he suddenly remembers his grandmother and the comfort that she was to him, and his anxious nature during that last stay, when the strangeness of the hotel room filled him with angst. Melissa, can you put the first slide on for Tracy to read, please?
On the first night, as I was suffering from cardiac exhaustion, trying to master my pain, I bent down slowly and cautiously to take off my boots. But no sooner had I touched the topmost button than my chest swelled, filled with an unknown, a divine presence. I shook with sobs, tears streamed from my eyes. The being who came to my rescue, who saved me from barrenness of spirit, was the same who years before, in a moment of identical distress and loneliness, in a moment when I was no longer myself, had come in and had restored me to myself. For that person was myself and more than myself, the container that is greater than the contents which it was bringing to me. I had just perceived in my memory, bending over my fatigue, the tender, preoccupied, disappointed face of my grandmother, as she had been on that first evening of our arrival. The face not of that grandmother whom I was astonished and reproached myself to find that I regretted so little, and who was no more of her than just her name, but of my own true grandmother, of whom for the first time since that afternoon in the Champs-Élysées on which she had had her stroke, I now recaptured, by a complete and involuntary memory, the living reality.
Okay, we have one chair, Melissa. Thank you. One of our participants, Melissa, Marcelita Swan, just sent a note on the chat. She's the one who arranged the meeting between myself and Professor Carter. Apparently he's in the car on his way home, so hopefully he will be with us soon. Thank you, Marcelita. So there are a lot to unpack in this passage, right? But we start with the ending, the involuntary memory. Involuntary memory is an integral part of the Madeleine episode in the first volume, where, you know, the taste of Madeleine evoked all those the memories of the narrator's childhood in Cambrai. Here, Proust seems to suggest that this moment in the Le Grand Hôtel mirrors the Madeleine episode, even though there is no sensory stimulant, right? It's the place that evokes the forgotten memories. As we know, places, name of places, is a favorite subject of Proust, isn't it? He devoted 2 chapters of his book to the concept. Proust uses the impact of sensory stimulant in recalling involuntary memories, such as the taste of Madeleine or the feel of uneven, pavement in the last volume, the sound of fork against the plate, hearing, touch. But there are other concepts in the book that can bring forth the involuntary memories. One of them is this, a place that you go to and you remember a past time you have visited that place. There's another one, Proust always talks about the weather, stormy weather just brings forth certain memories, and it's the same for us. But, the only difference between Madeleine episode or when the recollection is based on a sensory stimulant, and here is that in the Madeleine episode is the joy, he is filled with the joy of regaining a long forgotten past. But here in this passage, the memories are full of sorrow and profound sense of loss. But in this passage, if you remember, he talks about the disfigured image of his grandmother the last time he saw him on her deathbed. And then he remembers the first time that he spent, the first trip that they spent in Le Grand Hôtel. So he talks about the image of a healthy grandmother who comforted him in the last trip in Balbec, compared to the image of a disfigured grandmother at her deathbed, which annihilates the previous perfect image of her, comforting parent, support. So she transforms from a healthy self to a self who is sickly and very different. Of course, the concept of one self dying and another self replacing it as one lives a life is a theme in Proust's book, right? We call it, we say, okay, he has changed or she has changed, but Proust says that one self dies, another self appears and replaces it. But there is another part of the text that addresses this concept of various selves and changing selves. So, Melissa, can you put the next slide, please?
As soon as I had lived over again that felicity, as though it were present, feeling it shot through by the certainty, throbbing like a physical pain, of an annihilation that had effaced my image of that tendresse, had destroyed that existence, abolished retrospectively our interwoven destiny, made of my grandmother at the moment when I found her again as in a mirror, a mere stranger whom chance had allowed to spend a few years with me, as it might have been with anyone else, but to whom before and after those years I was nothing, I would be nothing.
So it seems that we, Professor Carter, we got another chat message. He is on Mountain Time, which is 1 hour difference. So he thought it was at 4 p.m. his time, which is 5 p.m. our time. So it was a mistake on my part not to make it clear. But I sent the link to the session, and it says Eastern Standard Time, but I should have made it clear. But anyway, he's going to be with us in about 10 minutes. So this passage that Tracy just read is a sad passage. The grandmother, as her old self that he now remembers, is a stranger. He says that he's only a mirror image. So here I was going to ask Professor Carter to make a comment on it, but one wonders if it's the horrible and disfigured image of her of his grandmother at her deathbed is what makes him forget her so easily, or not to remember the support that she was when he was a child, because all he remembers is an old, sickly, disfigured woman that he cannot really connect to the image that he had. That image all of a sudden appears here when he remembers how comforting she was to him. So that's the idealized self of his grandmother that has disappeared. He also refers to himself as the self he used to be, the one that needed the care and attention of the grandmother. I mean, it's very moving, the parts in the second volume when the grandmother tells him, I know you're, this is a strange room, just knock on the wall when you feel anxious. And he does that, and she responds by knocking back on the wall that separates the room. So, so here he is a different self too. He has grown up. He's not the child that needed and relied on her support so much. So here the concept of transformation of self is very much present in this passage, not only for the grandmother, but for the narrator himself. As I said before, the rest of us mortals, we say, oh, I have changed, I'm not that person, but here Proust, refers to it as a new self, replacing the old one. There is another concept explored in this text, which is the contradiction between memory and non-existence. The memories of the grandmother are alive, but she herself is not. So this topic is mentioned when the narrator talks about his mother, and he says that he is horrified realizing how much the mother is suffering, because he never suffered, a year after the grandmother. He never mourned for her or really talked about her in any depth. And here he all of a sudden realizes, why her mother just walks around sort of dazed and very sad. So there is another slide that Melissa, could you please put on?
My newfound grief enabled me, when my mother arrived, to talk to her as though it had existed always. She supposed merely that the sight of these places that I had visited with my grandmother had revived it. For the first time then, and because I felt a sorrow that was nothing compared with hers, but which opened my eyes, I realized and was appalled to think what she must be suffering. For the first time, I understood that the fixed and tearless gaze that she had worn since my grandmother's death was arrested on that incomprehensible contradiction between memory and non-existence.
Yeah, memory and non-existence. How do we reconcile these two aspects of human existence when one is faced with the death and annihilation of a loved one? That's the notion explored here. He never experienced it until this moment when he remembers vividly the image of the grandmother whom he loved and who loved him back. But the mother has been living with that that sadness ever since she lost her mother. Another thing he notices about his mother is that she has become, in an eerie way, the embodiment of the grandmother, as if the two are fused into one. She carries her handbag, reads her book, wears her dressing gown. It's sort of she becomes her mother. So we have a slide for this, Melissa, if you can put that in.
It is not enough to say that she had lost all her gaiety. Melted, congealed into a sort of imploring image, she seemed to be afraid of shocking by too sudden a movement, by too loud a tone, the sorrowful presence that never parted from her. But above all, as soon as I saw her enter in her mourning cloak, I understood, what had never occurred to me in Paris, that it was no longer my mother that I saw before me, but my grandmother.
Yeah, I would have loved to hear Professor Carter's comment on this, but when he's here, we will address this. But he even compares this change, this transformation, to the transfer of titles among the nobility after death. Like Duc d'Orléans, the father dies, and his son becomes the new Duc d'Orléans. So here, the mother becomes the new grandmother. To me, it sounded more like a message of hope and continuity. He even says, the narrator says, that the dead continue to act upon us. So I like to take this as a positive thing. And it's true, not only physically, we resemble, our parents or grandparents, the genetic effect, but sometimes the way we smile, or I don't know, certain habits, moving your hair, or things that we do might remind someone else of one of our parents. And he says that she resembled more the father, but now he sees more and more his grandmother in his mother. And then there is the moment that when you read the passage, you feel like he is losing the grandmother for a second time. He talked about her being a stranger, and here she becomes a stranger again. And we have another slide for that.
Then more pleasant memories returned to me. She was my grandmother and I was her grandson. Her facial expression seemed written in a language intended for me alone. She was everything in my life. Other people existed merely in relation to her, to the judgment that she would give me about them. But no, our relations were too fleeting to have been anything but accidental. She no longer knew me. I would never see her again. We had not been created solely for one another. She was a stranger to me.
Hello.
Yes, hi, Professor Parker.
Hi there.
I am so sorry. It's really my fault. I should have made it clear that it was 3 o'clock your time.
Well, that's fine. I apologize as well for anything that I may have contributed to the confusion. I'm sorry to be late. Please tell me what you'd like to do. Is start over, continue? I've been listening to the lovely reading of the last two quotes.
Okay, well, yeah, we can. The first slide that we addressed was about Madeleine, and I sent you the slide. So
yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'd like to hear your comments about the parallels between this passage and and Madeleine or other, cases
Sure,
of
sure.
sensory,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, well, let's go back then to the first slide. And the title of this, as you all well know, is Les Intermittences du Cœur, the Intermittencies of the Heart. And this was such a powerful notion and experience to Proust that in 1913, when he was shopping around the manuscript of Du Côté de chez Swann, and of course, Sodom and Gomorrah had not been written yet, let alone published, but Proust was considering the intermittence, I'm sorry, I can't get in either language here, the intermittencies of the heart as the overall title. And of course, that obviously didn't happen. There were a few comments that I wanted to make about the first slide. And in addition to the parallel between the Madeleine scene, and of course, it's clear from the passage, as you know, that he was using this as an example, as he says, in fact, the quote ends, a complete and involuntary memory, the living reality. But let's back up to the beginning when he goes in and the narrator is leaning over to undo his boots. And he said, the being who came to my rescue, who saved me from barrenness of spirit, was the same who years before, in a moment of identical distress and loneliness, in a moment when I was no longer myself, had come in and had restored me to myself, for that person was myself and more than myself, the container that is greater than the contents, which it is bringing to me. That's a lovely long Proust sentence, but I wanted to underline a theme here that is recurrent throughout the novel when he mentions the barrenness of spirit and the dryness of the soul, the lacking vitality, lacking warmth, lacking heart. Is a theme that we see throughout the novel, and of course, a lot of what we see throughout, particularly at the various aristocratic gatherings, is a version of Vanity Fair, and the word a wasteland, in other words, and Proust elsewhere talks about the nullity of society and so forth. And wasteland in French is la terre vaine, V-A-I-N-E. So it's the same notion of vanity, something that is so self-centered and egotistical in that sense that it's barren. And so here in the beginning of this passage in the Intermittencies, Proust uses this note of barrenness of spirit, our soul. And in the other passages, you've already read some of them, but the notion of les moi multiples, the multiple selves. So he comes back to this notion here that it recreates the person he was at the moment when he was at the Grand Hotel, and his grandmother, who was nurturing him, looking after him, caring for him, had helped him remove his boots because he was so tired, if I remember correctly, from a choking fit. So the whole notion throughout, of course, in the Madeleine scene, which is if you're a reader, that's the first involuntary memory experience that we encounter. But that event is set outside of the narrative sequence. In other words, we don't know exactly at what point in the narrator's life he had the experience of the Madeleine. But obviously with Les Intermittences du Cœur, we do know this is on his second trip back to the Grand Hotel at Balbec. And then at the very end of the novel, as you know, in Time Regained, when he steps on the uneven paving stones, and that is then Venice comes to life for him. And there's kind of a crescendo effect in Time Regained through the various involuntary experiences. So in order to move on a bit, if we're ready to, I think those are the key things that I wanted to say about the involuntary memory experience. Before we leave this paragraph, are there any questions or comments?
I think we are leaving all the questions for the end after we finish
Okay, all right.
discussing it. So
Okay.
yeah, you addressed the Madeleine and the concept of different selves. The next thing we talked about while you were not here was the mother. That first he realizes that the mother has been suffering the pain that he all of a sudden experiences. So the concept of memory and non-existence. And then the mother fused into the grandmother. She in his eyes, the mother is his grandmother. The habits, the way she looks, the way she walks, her clothing, reading the books that the grandmother read. So these two concepts, first memory and non-existence, and then fusing of the two, the parent and the grandparent, if you want to make a comment on that.
Yes, yes. The mother and the grandmother are the only two characters in the novel who are pure in the moral sense, that they have no flaws. They're perfect human beings, and of course they express the unconditional love for the narrator. The mother, of course, is paying the excuse me, by her imitation, and I won't give all the examples because you read them, by her becoming the grandmother, is of course paying her the greatest homage possible, because she's giving up her own individual identity. At least that's how the narrator sees her in this passage. Now later she's going to recover some of that autonomy, and particularly when she gets involved with not being sure that Albertine is a good match for the son. And then the last scene where we see her in the basilica. And of course, the mother does not die in the novel. So if we can step outside of the novel for a moment, I think what Proust has done here is he's taken his real mother and he's made of her two characters. He's made of her the grandmother, and the grandmother's death and agony are like the Proust's mother's death and agony. But of course, in the novel, I'm sorry, in real life, Proust was really bouleversé. I mean, he nearly went mad with grief when his actual mother died. So he has created the grandmother for that part of it, and then he's kept Proust has kept his real mother alive, as it were, because the last image that we have of her, as I said, in the basilica in Venice, and we know that was a very strong memory for Proust himself when he went there with his mother and Reynaldo Hahn and Marie Lordinger in 1900. So in Proust's own mind, when he's creating these two, the grandmother and the mother, I think there is indeed a fusion of the characters there. And then another point that I wanted to mention in this passage, I think one of the most overlooked aspects of the narrator's character throughout the novel is his admission at 2 points. He admits it here and he admits it later when Albertine has died, how selfish and egotistical and cruel he's been. And so there's a great deal of remorse and repenting in this passage. And the whole bit about the photograph, that the grandmother wanted taken so that he would have a memory of her, which is also ironical given everything that Proust is doing with memory and forgetting in this passage. And during that first stay at Baalbek, he ridiculed his grandmother and hurt her feelings because he basically was accusing her of being coquettish, and he didn't know why she was acting vain, which was, again, that word vain. From his point of view, that's what the young man thought he saw. But of course, the grandmother was acting in the most altruistic fashion. She was doing something she didn't like to do, and she was being deceptive, but she was doing it for him. And so in this whole intermittencies of the heart, that is what he comes to understand and recognize. And we get in the Albertine, after the death of Albertine, we have a similar recognition of his own failings, his own flaws, his egotism, and his cruelty. And he actually blames himself, as you may recall from the fugitive. He blames himself for having murdered his grandmother and Albertine. And he actually uses that word, murder. He killed them. And so I don't know how one could expect a greater confession and sense of guilty. Then we, of course, we have les moi multiples, the multiple selves, and this does not last. This does not last. At the very end, as you've seen from the quotes and from some of the discussion that you've already had, he begins to lose this vision of the resurrected person. I think what Proust is doing here, I think he's being very realistic about the way we remember people and forget people. And, you know, again, I think there's a parallel to draw between the remembering and forgetting in the fugitive. As much as we love a person, we cannot preserve that the full sense of their presence after they have died. There's a passage here, I don't think it's in the quotes that we chose, but it's towards the end of the intermittencies of the heart. And the narrator says, you know, again, his grandmother is disappearing for him again. And he says, what can you do? Les morts sont les morts. You know, the dead are dead. And life goes on, and life is for the living. So I think he's presenting, obviously, says, he basically says so in the text, the frustrating, he uses it twice. It's at the end of the third quote, and it occurs again later in the intermittencies of the heart. The incomprehensible contradiction between memory and non-existence. And as we said earlier, the exception, of course, is the mother. And it's not that she is remembering the grandmother. She doesn't have to remember the grandmother. She has become the grandmother in all of her actions, habits, and even sitting on the beach and reading Madame de Sévigné, just as the grandmother had done. And as I said later, there are different, the mother regains some autonomy in later passages, but here in the intermittencies, we see that transformation and that a metamorphosis of the mother into the grandmother.
And like you said, there are, repetitions like that memory and non-existence, and also that the grandmother is a stranger to him. There are some repetitions, but the narrator admits to feeling guilty, and the guilt, like you said, that he feels about his cruelty towards his grandmother seems to parallel Proust's guilt about his own cruelty towards his mother. And apparently, shortly after his mother's death, he wrote a letter to Robert de Montesquieu expressing his regrets and sorrow. He wrote that he has lost his only love and consolation in life. In other letters, he expressed remorse over being difficult with her and poisoning her life before she died. He says his sickness made his mother's death more difficult for her because she was worried about leaving him alone and defenseless. So Proust must have, related to the grief that he describes in this passage because of his, own personal experience with his mother's death, especially the guilt. There is another passage where the narrator talks about the guilt he felt for being cruel to his grandmother. But again, another repetition. But he says that he does not want to be consoled. He wants his suffering intensified. Maybe that's the way for him for, you know, a redemption, because he was so harsh and cruel to his grandmother.
Right. I think that's part of it. I think that's part of the I guess we can assume, and I'm glad you mentioned the actual letters that Proust wrote after his mother's death, and he made a similar comments earlier in 1903 when his father died. He said he recognized that he was the black spot in his father's life and so forth. Yes, I think that is. I think what Proust does, and I guess any great writer does it, is he takes what is a common emotion and intensifies it, and to make us all feel it. And I have no doubt that Proust himself felt it. But I think we all have these, no matter how fine and how good we tried to be with our parents and with people we love. I think when we lose them, we always realize, oh, if only, if only we had said certain things, if only we had asked certain questions, if only we had, not even a question maybe of being better, but just expressing this love. And of course, the narrator is blaming himself for having actually been misunderstanding and actually being cruel and mocking his grandmother. So yes, I think there is this pain that he, through his grief, that he wants to inflict on himself as part of his remorse.
Right. One other important element that you touched on briefly is that during that first trip, the narrator at the start of the trip was perhaps not a child, but very much a young person still needing the comfort and the support that the grandmother provided. But during this day, he changes, right? He discovers girls, les jeunes filles en fleurs. He even becomes so preoccupied with them that he doesn't realize that his grandmother is not well, because she was already sick during that trip. We also see, well, we talked about, his cruelty. You mentioned that the photo session she arranged with Robert de Saint-Loup was meant as a, keepsake for the grandchild, because she knew that she was dying. But the photo and the insult sort of has the same motive as the scene of Mademoiselle Vinteuil and her girlfriend behavior towards Vinteuil's photo that the narrator witnessed in Montjouvin during that voyeuristic episode, doesn't it?
Right. Well, yes, I think you can make a parallel between the profanation scene with Vinteuil's daughter and son ami, who is never given a name. Yes, I think you can do that. And there are, I suppose this is all part of the well, Proust calls, there was that section it's mentioned, and I forget now, I think it's in Sodom and Gomorrah, where he talks about a later chapter that's going to be called Les Mères Profanées, the profaned mothers. And this is probably part of that. There are also, we haven't talked about the dreams, although that was something.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that later.
There is that weird dream that he has, the narrator has, in which his parents are in a cage, and so forth. And so there are some traces of, certainly we can find them throughout, I think, of both in the novel and in the life, of examples of cruelty and unkindness and misunderstandings, even a bit of rebellion between the narrator and his parents. And certainly that was true in Proust's life. I'm just looking here again at quickly. Let's see.
But talking about the dreams, I've heard that some of them are based on actual dreams that Proust had about his own parents, both his mother and his father, when they died, and he jotted them down and then used them in this section. In the dreams, the father acts as an intermediary between him and the grandmother. I don't know if, what can one make, what do you make of that?
Yes, I'm not sure what to make of it. I guess the safest thing to say is, as you all know, is that Proust is one of the first off authors, certainly a main author, to take sleep as a major thing that he analyzes and explores in the novel. And of course, Freud was working basically on many of these same issues at the same time as Proust, but we know that Proust had not read Freud. So these were things that were in the air. The narrator does have, as we've said, these strange dreams. And then later, and I believe this is in Time Regained, when he's thinking about the forces that will enable him to write the future book, he said that for a while he thought dreams might be one of the keys, and then he realizes that they are not. So I suppose one could conclude from that Proust himself ultimately doesn't know how to explain or what to do with the content of his dreams. And certainly at the end of Les Intermittences, or towards the end of Les Intermittences, when he has that strange dream about serre, Françaises, jam, fourchette, forks. I mean, none of that makes any sense. I suppose you could try to make a connection between the fourchette and the one he hears later in Time Regained, and when the waiter hits it against the plate, and that brings back a whole nother series of involuntary memories. Maybe some of you have some other ideas about dreams. I don't really know what else to say.
That's a bit the nature of dreams, sometimes they're strange, but at one point the father tells him that the grandmother is happy that he's writing a book. So it seems that has like its basis on his anxiety about, anxiety caused by his desire to make her proud of him.
Yes, and that's interesting too, that occurs in a dream, because we know the narrator's not writing a book. And we know that his extreme frustration until the very end of the novel is that he cannot write a book. One thing that I find, I don't know what the right word is, abusing, enchanting about this novel is in some of the most glorious prose ever written, he's telling us all throughout he can't write. He has no imagination, he can't observe, he certainly lacks the willpower and so forth until the very end, until Time Regained.
Another thing is that Proust mixes all these sad passages with all, very the depth of his, thinking. He mixes them with funny ones about the hotel manager and his use of malapropisms, and it acts as a comic relief. First of all, I'm amazed by the excellence of the translations in conveying those, because it's difficult, something
Well,
a lot of
Scott Moncrief and I, Scott Moncrief, I think had done a good job. Yes, there is that humor element in there, and of course, this is something, as you know, that Proust returns to a number of times. It's not only the hotel manager, but Françaises also, who makes a number of errors or malapropisms. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I hope you agree that this passage has all the hallmarks of Proust's writing. There is sadness, gravity, complexity, even comedy, and everything.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the only real examples throughout the novel when he actually knows pure joy is in the passages where he is either experiencing, the Madeleine, which is also involuntary, but there's just pure joy. And
Right.
so the only passages in the entire novel where the narrator actually experiences pure joy is when it is a question of art or creativity, when he has this great élan vital, you know, when he feels the power. And there's even, I think it's in L'Homme des jeunes filles en fleurs, where he talks about le sourire d'art, the smile of art. Art is something that always smiles at him and makes him happy and gives him this great joy. We can, I'm not in any hurry, but we can hop to the end if we want to. And then
Yeah, I think that's where the chapter ends with the sudden pouring of rain, signaling a day in spring. Maybe we can put that slide up and Tracy can read it for us.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to
No, we are getting to
anything.
the time where
Yes,
we
well, this is really a literary device that Proust uses throughout the novel. Many of the novels, sections of the novel, and here the Intermittencies, end with a change in the season or a change in the weather, and it's almost I don't know. I think it's a little bit like a musical motif. You know, he gives us these beautiful sentences, and this is like the end of this passage, and now we're going to move on to another time or to another episode in his life, and so this is something that Proust does fairly often, and the he it's typical of a day in early spring where the weather keeps changing. Then the rays of the sun gave place suddenly to those of the rain. They streaked the whole horizon, caught the line of apple trees in their gray net, but they continued to hold aloft their beauty, pink and blooming, in the wind that had turned icy beneath the drenching rain. It was a day in spring, and so that um,
Well, I was sort of worried that the text was too sad and not suitable for the celebration of Proust's birthday, but this ending, denoting, rebirth and new life, convinced me otherwise. In a way, I think Proust says that life goes on despite all the sorrows that one experiences, right?
Yes, through the cycles of the season, and of course that is part of, as you all know, the structure of the novel, that it is circular, that the first and last words in French containing the word time, longtemps, dans le temps.
Exactly, yeah. So, René, maybe we can get some of the questions discussed.
Yes, and we'll be happy to continue this discussion or anything that anyone wants to bring up about Proust's novel or life.
Fereshteh and Dr. Carter, first of all, welcome, Dr. Carter. There's a question here that says, Dr. Carter, hi, I have seen, hang on, I can't, your volume of Proust annotations, but I'm embarrassed to say I did not realize you did the translations as well. Was there a particular motivation that led to your dissatisfaction with the other translations?
Well, actually, I never claimed to have been the translator. I revised and annotated. No, so the Scott Moncrief translation is the translation, and what I have done is I have revised it, and in some instances to make it closer to the original, in some instances to correct errors. And in other instances, we now have what is considered the definitive French version, which Scott Moncrief did not have. And so passages that are phrases even that he omitted, I have included. So I'm a huge admirer of Scott Moncrief's translation. And it says that on the cover of all of my books. It says, the C.K. Scott Moncrief translation, edited and annotated by William Carter. So I don't claim to be the translator, just the
but the additions and revisions are a big improvement, but the annotations are my favorite part. They're so helpful.
Well, thank you. I wanted there to be a complete annotated edition in English, just as there is in the Pléiade French edition. I'll give you two examples, and everybody makes mistakes. But in the first trip to Baalbek, when the narrator is riding in the train, and he's looking out the window, and sometimes because the train is doing a circuitous thing, he runs from one side of the train to the other side of the train, and he's describing what he sees. And in French, he sees an elegant woman walking a lévrier. And Scott Moncrief translated that, a woman with a dog. Now, we all love dogs, but we know dog can mean any kind of dog. And what the woman is actually walking with is a lévrier, which is a greyhound. And so I put the greyhound instead of the dog. And then later, in that same looking out of the window, the narrator sees a lavoir. And a lavoir is a wash house. The women would take the clothes down to the banks of the river and wash them and put them on the stones to dry. And Scott Moncrief translated that as pond. Well, pond does have water in it, but it's not the same as lavoir. So there's some little things like that throughout that he either mistranslated or was distracted. I guess one of the biggest ones is that when Gilberte inherits the fortune, Scott Moncrief, in a dyslexic moment, she inherits 80,000 francs or million, and he reversed it to 24, which is, it went from 80 to 24. So 80 is 80 and 24 is 24. So it was just a dyslexic thing. And everybody makes mistakes, but I did have the huge benefit of that beautiful translation. And then unfortunately, Scott Moncrief got sidetracked and started translating who's the author of Six Characters in Search of a whatever play, the Italian author.
Ionesco.
No, not Ionesco, but it's
Pirandello.
Pirandello.
Oh,
So he
Pirandello.
started translating Pirandello, and then he died. And so the last Time Regained has 3 different translators, but the one that I chose to use for my volume that'll be out in next May is the Andreas Mayor translation. And so again, there were some passages, perhaps more than in any other volume. I don't know about pages and pages and pages, but sometimes there'll be a paragraph or maybe a page that's in the French text that Andreas Mayor, he did that, his translation in 1970. So he did not have the complete text. So anyway, thank you for those of you who have enjoyed the volumes and the annotations, and
we are looking forward to next May to get
so am I.
and the last volume. René, do we have any?
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Roger Mummert is asking, and you may have already alluded to this, but Freud's interpretation of dreams was published in 1899, though it took some years of revisions before it was completed. Is there any indication that Proust read the book or was engaged in discussions of Freud and dreams?
None that have come to light so far. And of course, we always have to be careful because new letters are always surfacing. So we may find a letter that proves that Proust did read it, but not now, not to our knowledge at present. There have been some books, and I won't be able to think of the titles of them all right now, but comparing, you're probably aware of this, some of what Proust did as a novelist and his analyses and his character studies that are similar to what Freud did, but there's no indication of any direct contact. Proust did have a vague notion of what Einstein was up to, and even during Proust's lifetime, a number of critics compared Proust's use of relativity and his some of the passages that he wrote about time and space to what Einstein was doing. But again, I don't think Proust, I think it was kind of secondhand information that people told Proust rather than Proust. I don't remember when Einstein was first translated. Just theory of general relativity and that sort of thing was first translated into French. Some of you may know, but I can't remember. I don't think it was during Proust's lifetime, but I'm not certain.
So Fereshteh and Dr. Carter, I think we've sort of come to the end. Do you have any closing comments as we perhaps look forward to our next time?
No, what I enjoy most are hearing from you guys, whatever you might be interested in or want to comment on, and then I might feed off of that. I think first of all, thanks to Fereshteh for organizing this celebration of Proust's birthday before we go, and for sending slides for us and focusing our comments. I think the closing thing might be that this novel in its rich complexity is something that just keeps on giving to us all. And I'm again very grateful that Scott Moncrief, who not only was a very experienced translator when he started translating Proust, but who was a poet himself. And I think that the French, and I guess this is true of any great writer, but are good writers, but I'm mainly acquainted with French, give a great deal of attention to what they call la chute des phrases, the way phrases end. And we saw that a little bit was A Day in the Spring. And also in the first quote, the narrator, when he has this experience, he doesn't tell us right away what's happening. I mean, we can guess. I bent down slowly and cautiously to take off my boots. It's 10 or 12 lines down before he tells us the disappointed face of my grandmother. So we don't really know. We're kind of experiencing the emotion as it unravels in his mind, and that's something. The la chute des phrases, the way phrases, Proust sentences are musically orchestrated, and the way they end. I think that's something that Scott Moncrief was very, very sensitive to. And so that's why I think that many people, Adam Gopnik, F. Scott Fitzgerald, someone contemporary, someone not contemporary, considered Scott Moncrief's translation to be a masterpiece in itself. So I think that for Anglophone readers, that's a huge benefit that we wouldn't have otherwise. And then one of my wonderful experiences, benefits in having worked on Proust is not only the quality of the beauty of the prose and the quality of the thought, is meeting people like you and getting to share the experience. It always strikes me that there's a great deal, as you know, that happens in the novel, but we read it and reread it, and it's not because we're waiting to see what happens. We're waiting to experience again what's happening in the text, but also what is happening in us as we read. I think if you had a person who was not familiar with Shakespeare, and you gave them the plot of Hamlet, just the plot as it might appear in a plot outline, and you might say, well, would you like to go see that? And the person might say, so we see Hamlet again and again and again. We know how it ends. Everybody's dead on the stage. But it's the beauty of the language and the quality of the thought, that keeps us coming back. And I think we appreciate Proust's own revelation to himself and to us of les mots multiples, and I think that's why he is such a realist, as this is really how we do experience life, that not only are we multiple selves, but the people we associate with and love or don't love are also moi multiples. So I guess we just need to keep on enjoying the multiplicity and beauty of life.
You're right. Proust is an acquired taste. I always say it's not a book you choose to read. The book has to choose you because people give up, you know. Some people.
Well, you know, in my experience, people really discover Proust, and I think we're all, as true, I have a PhD, but I think I read other books other than Proust. I mean, I think he has this tremendous appeal to people, and very often what people want to do, like us, I suppose, as soon as you get to the end, you want to start over again and have that experience. Yeah, I remember. Pardon me.
We are coming to the end, so I like to thank Alliance Française again, Melissa, René, and Tracy, and especially you, Bill, thank you so much for this wonderful session. It's such a pleasure to be able to hear, you know.
Well, that's a great pleasure for me, and I'm not in any hurry. If anybody has anything else, I don't know if you're on some kind of a time thing, but if anybody has anything else, yeah.
I think Melissa determines that.
Okay.
I think we've come to the end, Fereshteh, unfortunately. But thank you for bringing Dr. Carter to AFUSA. And I know there are still some questions in the chat, but I'm not sure there's any way to continue with you and Dr. Carter without AFUSA hosting.
Okay, I'll leave all of these decisions up to you, and thank you. It's been a pleasure for me, and I believe you have, and Fereshteh has my contact information, so
Yeah.
I'll be happy to stay in touch with anybody if you want to.
Yeah, and I would love to organize other sessions with you around a different topic, different subject, if you agree.
Well, yes, it would be a pleasure, and maybe when Time Regained comes out, that might be.
Yes, we could. Exactly, that's perfect. Yes. Well, thank you again.
Thank you to everyone. We look forward to seeing you.
And thank you, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.